Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. Hope you are all well and safe. Um, Today, shiur is the Ilay Nishmas, Aaron Nachman Sukkot Kohen, Yeshua Morcha B'Shtef Sabrach, Sav Shmolei, Ben Yemen, Yemen Moshe Ben Yosef. May the Neshel shall have an aliyah. Before Shlema for Yisrael Mercha Lei, Racha Bas Pesach Zoda, Racha Aliyana Bas Yar Bracha, Am Yisrael Berisha, Chai B'Tebel, Before Shlema B'Sof Shar, Cholei Yisrael. Um, And shout out to our good friends at the Imperial Advisory Group for their support for this year. If you or your company need help with all you need, they have 30 years of experience and are the best in the business as far as CFOs are concerned. Here we go. Perek Gimel Bava Basra talks about the halacha of chazakah. Chazakah is a presumption that someone owns a property or has the right to use a property. Um, as a way, uh, but, a little bit of an intro with respect to movable objects. Possession of an item is in a word about you holding something in your hand that's usually you could assume that it belongs to the person, and if someone's claiming that the court says he has to bring proof. It doesn't work with land or with real estate. Someone is occupying the land. We do not automatically assume that it's his. Rather, the assumption is that the land still belongs to the last known owner, and that the current occupier must prove that he acquired it legally. This obviously works the best if he has a bill of sale, but the Chachamim recognize that a person cannot be expected to keep a bill of sale available forever to avoid claims against his property. Therefore, they determined that people generally keep track of such documents for 3 years. And if someone occupies the property for 3 years without protest from the previous owner, he has been established that the land is his, even if he cannot produce the bill of sale from that time on. Um, but if the previous owner challenges the occupier's right to be on the property, the occupier will be believed if he claims that he purchased the property but cannot locate his bill of sale. That status of the presumed is called based upon the fact that previous or the as occupier of land with Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all well. Today we are learning the third Perek of Basra. Today's shiur is Lulu Nishmas, Aronachim and Sukkah Kohen, Shomorchem, Shtepsel, Bracha Savish, Malev, and Biram Moshe Ben Yosef. May the ourselves will have an only and first them with the Rachalea, Rachel Bas Pasasol, the Rachel Aliana Basiar Bracha. Our musical Ben Risha, Chavis to Abel, first them, Besok Shar Chal Yisrael, and of course to our good friends at the Imperial Advisory Group. For their sponsorship of the shiur for the month. If you or your company are in need of financial help from the CFOs, please reach out to them at imperialgrp.com. They are 30 years in the business and they're the best they can help. Anywho, today's perek is Cheskas Habatim, talks about chazakah, and chazakah is about the presumed ownership of a property. When it comes to a tangible item, you have to, by holding the item in your hand, or that's already enough of a chazakah. That's proof of ownership. But when it comes to property, it's not so. Someone who is in the someone who occupies the land for 3 years has to keep his bill of sale for 3 years, and after 3 years, if there's been no protest by the previous owner, then he doesn't need to keep the bill of sale anymore because he had 3 years to hold on to it. If the guy during those 3 years, if his ownership is questioned, he has to produce the bill of sale, and after 3 years expire, it's presumed that he is the owner of the property if no one's contested until now. So let's start with the Perek Gimel Mishnah Aleph Cheskas Habatim Haboros VaShichim HaMa'aros VaShavachos VaMechatzos VaBeis Habadim Beis Hashalchim VaHavadim. Right. So if someone is to establish a chazakah on houses, pits, ditches, which are long narrow pits, vaults, as we are square roof pits, like we said yesterday, dovecotes, bathhouses, olive presses, and irrigated fields and slaves, or any other property that produces constantly. The halacha is that the chazakah is established through 3 full years of uncontested use, from the first day of the first year to the last day of the third year. The occupier of the property establishes a chazakah to any of these properties by using the property for 3 full consecutive years. Regarding a rainwater field, the halacha is that its chazakah is also established through 3 years of uncontested use. But they need not be full years from the first day of year 1 to the last day of year 3. Rabbi Yishmael says, Shlosha chadashim b'rishona, Shlosha b'achrona, v'shneim asar chodesh be'emsa. One must, according to Yishmael, one must use the field for 3 months of the first year and 3 months of the last year, and the full 12 months of the middle year. So that's a total of Harei Shmona Asar Chodesh, for a total of 18 months. Rabbi Yishmael holds that since a crop, so the barley or lentils can be produced once a year in as little as 3 months. The person purchases a field near the end of the year, produces a crop in 3 months, then uses the field for the next full year and produces a regular crop, and then again produces a 3-month crop in the beginning of the third year. He has used the field to produce 3 crops as an owner would, and he has established a chazakah if no protest against his occupation was made. Rabbi Kiva says, Chodesh b'rishon v'chodesh b'achrona shneim asar chodesh be'emsa. Rabbi Kiva says it's enough for him to have use it for 1 month of the first year, 1 month of the last year, and 12 months in between the middle year. Harei abar asar chodesh. Excuse me. For a total of 14 months. Rabbi Kiva holds that since the field can be used to produce a crop such as vegetables or unripe grain, which is harvested and used as animal fodder, animal food, in as little as a month, you can establish that a 3-year chazakah in 14 months by producing a 1-month crop, then a regular crop, and then another 1-month crop. Rabbi Yishmael said, when were these, what are we talking about here? What are these words said? When does Rabbi Yishmael state that it requires 18 months to establish a chazakah? The stay lava, with respect to the chazakah of a rainwater field, whose produce is gathered all at one time. Stay Elon, but in the case of an orchard containing various types of trees and vines, Kane says to us, so Masak is Zisa, Kana says Kitso. If he gathered his grapes and then gathered his olives and then took in his figs, Hare Elish Shlosh Shanim, this is the equivalent of 3 years, and he's established a chazakah in a single year. Mishnah Beis, Shalosh Archos the chazakah. There are 3 lands, 3 provinces in Israel with regard to chazakah. We discussed this. No, it's a little bit different from what we discussed previously. Yehuda, Eber, Yarden, Galilee, Judea, which is the south, the Transjordan, which is the east, and the Galilee, which is the north. These are considered 3 separate provinces with respect to chazakah, because travel between these areas was difficult. People did not move between them often, even during peacetime. Remember, going by camel, going by donkey back in the day was very difficult. Not like now we have cars. You could go from the north to the south and actually in about 6 to 8 hours. It took much longer back then. So chazakah cannot be established on property one of these 3 regions if the previous owner is in a different region. Therefore, Hayya Yehuda, if a person was in Judea, Hechse Galil, someone occupied a property he had owned in the Galil for 3 years. The Galil, the Hechse Yehuda, or if he was in the Galil, someone occupied a property he had in Judea for 3 years, and a chazakah is not without chazakah. So even though the occupier used the property for 3 years, no chazakah is established since the previous owner is technically out of the country. He failed to protest for 3 years. His failure to protest for 3 years does not create the sense of security that would give the occupier an excuse to lose track of his bill of sale. The chazakah cannot be established unless the previous owner is with the occupier in the same province. Rabbi Yehuda, however, said, the Chacham did not state that establishing a chazakah takes 3 years. Only so that even if the owner of the land is in far off Spain, and someone occupies his land for a year, he will travel in the second year to inform him of the occupation. And will come back to Israel by the end of the 3rd year to reclaim his land. He does not agree. He does not agree with the Chacham of the previous Mishnah, who hold that the reason that a 3-year period is needed to establish a chazakah is because the person keeps track of the bill of sale until he has used the property for 3 years without being challenged. Rather, he holds that the 3-year period was made for the benefit of the previous owner to give him time to return, even from far away, to challenge an illegal occupier. Clearly, according to Yehuda, someone can make a chazakah on land even if the owner is not in the area. Mishnah Gimel, Kol chazakah she'ein ima taina, any chazakah that's not copied by a legal ownership, ain't a chazakah, is not a valid chazakah case. So, Amalav ma'ata oseh b'sok shali. If someone said to his fellow, "What are you doing in my property?" Who Amar li shelo Amar li Adam Dar Me'olam, and he replied to him, "I am using this property because no one ever told me anything in protest." He does not say that he ever bought or acquired the property. Ain't a chazakah. This is not a valid chazakah. He must leave the property because he does not claim to own it or have any right to it. Although he resided there for 3 or more years without protest, this means nothing unless he also advanced the claim. And give a reason why the property is legally his, such as a claim that he bought it or received it as a gift. If, however, the occupier replies, "I'm here because you sold me the property," or because you gave it to me as a gift, avicha machrali, avicha nas noliva matana. Or he says, your father sold it to me, or your father gave it to me as a gift. Harezu chazakah, then this is a val chazakah. In these cases, the occupier's chazakah allows him to successfully claim the property, even though he cannot provide a bill of sale or a gift deed to back up his claim. Once the 3 years of his occupancy pass without challenge, it is possible that he could have secured his ownership and misplaced his bill of sale. And one who comes with the claim to inherit the claim of inheritance does not need to defend his ancestors' claim. If the occupier claims that he received the property as inheritance from his father, he is not required to provide proof that his father acquired legally from the previous owner. As long as he has established a chazakah using the property for 3 years without protest and can provide proof that his father lived on the property for at least 1 day before he died, the claim is believed. Craftsmen, partners, sharecroppers, and administrators cannot establish a chazakah because their unchallenged use of the land for 3 years does not prove that they own it. They're doing a job. They're not the owners of the property. A man cannot establish a chazakah upon the property of his wife, but by Torah law, a husband is required to provide food for his wife, and the sages and Chacham gave him the right to use the produce of any real estate that she brings into the marriage. Since he is entitled to eat the produce of the fields while they are married, he cannot establish the chazakah by doing so. Below the isha chazakah v'nechse bala, nor can a woman establish a chazakah upon the property of her husband. Since a husband is required by law to provide food for his wife, the fact that she eats the produce of his field cannot be the basis for a chazakah. Below the ab v'nechse ben, also a father cannot establish a chazakah on the property of his son. Below the ben v'nechse av, and a son cannot establish a chazakah on the property of a father. In all these cases, occupancy does not prove ownership, because the true owner has a reason to let the occupier use the land without protesting. Okay, there's another type of chazakah, which we're going to learn about now. Whatever these words stated, the Maxi regarding someone who established a chazakah to prove his claim of ownership, he's trying to establish a 3-year chazakah as his proof that he owns the property he's occupying, so he will not need to produce his deed to the property if his right to it is challenged. But if a person is giving a gift to someone else, the recipient of the gift wishes to make a kinyan chazakah to acquire it, or if the brothers are dividing an estate and a kinyan chazakah is being performed by each heir to acquire his portion of the estate so that the others cannot retract and protest the division, or if someone wishes to acquire the owner of this property of a deceased convert, a ger who passed away, but now the god of a faretz and the recipient locked it up, fenced it in, or breached its fences even a little bit. Harezu chazakah, this is a val chazakah of acquisition, and he thereby acquires the property. Even the groups of people listed earlier in the Mishnah who cannot establish 3 chazakah on certain properties can legally acquire these properties with a kinyan chazakah. Mishnah Dalet. Hayishnayim me'idim also she'achlal shaloshanim. 2 witnesses testified for the occupier that he ate the crops of the field for 3 years. And then they are found to be zomim witnesses. In the zomim, when Sham and Lois Akol, they must pay the property's true owner its entire value, since they were plotting to make him lose the entire field. Shnayim b'rishon, shnayim b'shniyah, shnayim b'shlishis. If the aiders for the chazakah provided by 3 sets of witnesses, with 2 testifying about the first year, 2 testifying about the second year, and 2 testifying about the third year, they were all found to be zonim. We divide the penalty among them, with each set paying 1/3 of the field's value to the true owner. In this case, we assume that the 3 sets of witnesses that were produced by the occupier all applied together to deprive the true owner of his land. Therefore, the penalty is divided among them, and each set of witnesses must pay 1/3 of the land's value to the true owner. There are three brothers who each testified to 1 year of a chazakah, and 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 one other unrelated person who combined with each one of them testifying to the entire 3 years of the chazakah. Hare elu shalosh edius. These are considered three separate testimonies, and the chazakah is valid. Although although relatives usually cannot testify together, in this case, the brothers may all testify, since they're testifying about different time periods. There are therefore two witnesses testifying by each of the 3 years, one of the brothers and the unrelated witness. However, they're considered to be one testimony with regard to Azama. So even though we view the 3 years of chazakah as three separate testimonies, and then therefore we allow the three brothers to testify, the 3 year chazakah is still viewed as one unit regarding the laws of Hazama. Therefore, this case, the kasher Zaman penalty does not apply unless all four of the witnesses were found to be Zomim, and if they are found to be Zomim, the penalty is divided among them, with the unrelated witness paying half the value of the land, and each of the brothers paying 1/6. Okay, now we're going to talk another type of chazakah. Cheskas Tashmishim. Let's see, Mishnah Hey. Elu Devarim Sheyesh Lahem Chazakah. Excuse me. These are the things to which a partner in a shared courtyard can establish a chazakah of usage. These are the things which we cannot establish a chazakah of usage. Just keeping an animal in the courtyard, where you set up a tanner oven, a kira oven, or a set of millstones in the courtyard. You have a magado tanner golem, or he was raising chickens within the courtyard. No stains, zivlo, the chatzer, or storing his animals' manure in the courtyard. Even if he did these things for 3 years and the other partner did not protest, he has not established a chazakah by doing so. And the partner can demand that these items be removed. Since these uses are not permanent and cause no structural change to the courtyard, the partner will allow them to continue even for more than 3 years without protest. For he knows that if he needs the space of 1 day, it can be easily removed. Therefore, his silence does not prove that he has agreed to allow such use permanently. However, if he made an enclosure to contain his animal within the courtyard, and it was at least 10 tachim high, and similarly, if he made a 10 tachim enclosure in the courtyard to surround his tanner oven, his kira oven, or his millstones, or if he brought chickens into a house that he owned jointly with another person, or if he constructed a place to store his animals' manure that was either 3 tvachim higher or 3 tvachim deeper than the rest of the courtyard. The second partner remains silent, does not protest these uses for 3 years, and the first partner has established a chazakah and he has acquired the rights to use the courtyard permanently for these things. Mishnah Vav. Hamar Zev, Ein Lo Chazak. One who placed a downspout. Downspout is a pipe that receives water from a roof gutter, channels it into his neighbor's courtyard. In a particular spot for 3 years without protest does not thereby establish a chazakah of usage to keep the downspout in that particular spot. The neighbor can require him to move to a different side of the roof. Right? As an example, if the gutter is placed along the eastern side of the roof from north to south, and the downspout is located at the southern end of the gutter, the neighbor can demand that the downspout be moved to the northern end of the gutter. Since in either case the roof owner will be able to rid his roof of the water, the precise location of the downspout does not make much difference, and the neighbor can ask him to move it even if he did not protest its placement for 3 years. Yesh l'makom chazakah, but he does thereby establish a chazakah for the downspouts general area, and the neighbor cannot force him to remove it entirely. While the roof owner cannot establish a chazakah to keep the downspout on a particular end of the gutter, he has established a chazakah to the right to allow his rainwater to descend into his neighbor's property. Therefore, while the neighbor can ask him to move the downspout, he cannot ask him to remove it completely, only to shift it from side to side. Hamaskila yesh lo chazakah. The use of a gutter for 3 years in one spot, however, does establish a chazakah for that particular spot, and the neighbor cannot require that it be moved. A gutter is considered a permanent fixture, and by allowing it to remain in place for 3 years without protest, the neighbor shows that he accepts that it will remain there permanently, and therefore he cannot even demand that it be removed to be moved to a different side of the roof. Sulam Hamitzri Elo Chazaka, in a small Egyptian ladder is not established a chazakah, even if it's left in place for 3 years in the neighbor's yard, and the neighbor may demand its removal whenever he wishes. An Egyptian ladder has 4 rungs, or less than 4 rungs. But a large Tyrian ladder does establish a chazakah after 3 years, and the neighbor must then allow it to remain in place permanently. Small ladder is not considered a permanent fixture, and neighbor will not protest its placement because he knows it is temporary. Therefore, even if it remains in place for 3 years, no chazakah is established. Placing a large ladder, however, is a more permanent act. If a neighbor allows it to remain in place for 3 years, he cannot ask that it be removed afterwards. Chalon hamitzis ein la chazakah. A small Egyptian window cannot establish a chazakah. A neighbor is therefore entitled at any time to build a structure on his property that blocks the window, even if the window has been there for many years. The Egyptian window is so small, which we'll talk about the next Mishnah, that one cannot stick his head into its opening. Therefore, even if it overlooks a private courtyard, it is little concern for loss of privacy, while the neighbor can protest its opening if he wishes. The fact that he did not protest proves nothing, as he can claim that he was not concerned about such a small window because it was not harming him at all. Therefore, even if the window has been in place for many years, the neighbor can block it with a structure of his own. So it's serious, yesh lehem chazakah, but a larger Tyrian window does establish a chazakah, and once that chazakah has been established, the neighbor may not block the window with any construction. A large window is a permanent installation. It also gives its owner the ability to see into a neighbor's property very easily. Therefore, the neighbor should have protested its opening. If he does not, a chazakah is established. So which window is an Egyptian window? Any window whose opening is so small that the head of a person cannot enter into it. Rabbi Yehuda, however, says, if the window has a frame, and even if a person's head cannot fit into it, it is treated like a Tyrian window, and it can establish a chazakah. According to Rabbi Yehuda, any window that has a frame is considered a permanent fixture, which the neighbors should have protested. Hazis are tefach yesh lo chazakah. A projection, even if it is small as a tefach, can establish a chazakah for its place, which will prevent a neighbor from demanding that it be removed. Any projection that is a tefach long can be used for storage and is considered significant. The neighbor does not protest its use for 3 years. Then a chazakah is established. Therefore, one's neighbor can protest if he wishes to build a projection of this type. Placement of such a pole or peg will potentially cause the neighbor a loss because once it is established, he will be unable to build anything that requires its removal. Therefore, he has the right to protest as soon as it is put into place. But if the projection is smaller than a tefach, it's considered insignificant and it cannot establish a chazakah that will prevent its removal. Such a small peg is considered insignificant, and the neighbor will not protest its presence unless he needs its place. His failure to protest, even for many years, will not establish a chazakah. Therefore, one's neighbor cannot protest if he wishes to put such a small peg in place. Although the neighbor can certainly require him to remove even a small peg if he wants to build a structure that requires its removal, then he may not prevent him from placing such a small peg initially. Okay. It's very interesting because like yesterday we had 14 mishnayos, but the mishnayos were shorter. Now today we have 8 mishnayos, but the mishnayos are kind of long, so it's almost like the same size Perek. But Hashem, it's Torah. We get schar for learning every word of it. So who am I to complain? Oh, excuse me. Um. Mishnah Zayin. Lo yirtach adno chalanasu lechatzer shut. A person may not open windows from his house so that they will overlook a courtyard in which he is a partner, as this will prevent his partner from being able to use the courtyard for private activities. And so, although he owns a share of the courtyard and has the right to be there, his neighbor can still use the courtyard for private things when he is not in the courtyard. Opening a window that overlooks the courtyard will prevent the neighbor from ever using it for private activities, since he cannot tell when someone will be looking out the window. Yeah, lakach bayis b'chatzar acheres. Also, one buys a house in the courtyard other than his own, and the back wall of the house faces to his courtyard that he shares with his neighbor. He may not open a new door for the house through that back wall into the courtyard in which he is a partner, because the people living in the newly bought house will then walk through the shared courtyard, increasing the foot traffic there. Although he already owns a share in the courtyard, the second house he bought does not, for it does not open onto that courtyard. The other neighbors can therefore refuse to allow the residents of the second house to walk through their courtyard, and he cannot open a door from the new house onto the courtyard without their permission. Bana Aliyah al Gabi Besa, for the same reason he built an additional story on top of his house. He may not open the door from it directly into a shared courtyard, because the people that will live in the new story will cause increased traffic in the courtyard. But if he wishes, he may build extra rooms within his house, or he may build an attic room on top of his house, and open them into his own house rather than directly into the shared courtyard. He may subdivide his house into smaller rooms or build a low ceiling inside the house to create an attic without adding to the total square footage of the interior of the house. Since he is entitled to fill his entire house with residents if he wishes, no one can object if he divides the house into smaller rooms, as long as he does not create a separate entrance. And since they all exit from his door, the neighbors cannot complain about the extra traffic. One may not open in the case of a shared courtyard. Pesach connected Pesach, doors that are directly opposite of neighbors' doors. The chalon connected chalon, or windows that are directly opposite of neighbors' windows, because this will cause the neighbor to suffer the loss of his privacy. If there was already a small door or window there, he may not make it into a large one because his neighbor can claim, I am able to guard my privacy when you have only a small door opening into the courtyard. I cannot do so if you have a large one, because it's much easier to see into the courtyard from a large door. Excuse me. Similarly, If there was already one door or window there, he may not make it into two, because this will also cause the neighbor to lose his privacy to a greater degree. But one may open to the public domain. Pesach and Pesach, a door that is directly opposite the door of his neighbor who lives across the street. The chalon connected chalon, or a window that is directly opposite the window of a neighbor across the street. These actions will not cause any loss of privacy because the neighbor has no privacy from the people constantly passing by in the street in any case. Therefore, the restrictions that apply to opening doors or windows into a shared courtyard do not apply in this case. Hayakatan osa gadol, similar to the door or window that was there was small, he may make it larger. Echad osa shnayim. And if there was one door or window there, you may make it into two because this will make no difference to the neighbor across the street. Mishnah Ches, lesson for today. One may not dig any type of tunnel beneath the public domain. Tell us to the Arabs. Baros, Shichin, the Ma'aros, whether they are pits, ditches, or vaults, where we are concerned the tunnel will weaken the street and it will collapse and cause damage. Maybe there's a matter where those however allows the digging of a tunnel under the street. They should hey agala mehaleches tuna avanim. As long as they're strong enough so that a wagon full of stones can travel over it safely, so that we are not concerned that the street will collapse. Like a heavy truck. One may not put up poles or balconies that stick out from his house into the airspace over the public domain, as we concern that passerbys may injure themselves upon them. Rather, if he wishes to put up poles or balconies, he must move his house farther back into his own property and then put them up so that they are entirely within his own property, do not stick out onto the street. However, if he bought a house in the courtyard that already had poles and balconies and that appear to be sticking out over the public property, this courtyard has its chazakah. He is not required to move the poles and balconies. So we assume that the seller moved his house back as per the law, and the poles and balconies were built permissibly over private land. That's all for today. See you tomorrow for Perek. Have a wonderful day.